The reactor screamed as another warning light died. Heat bled through cracked armor. Radiation alarms merged into a single relentless tone while one human hand refused to leave the manual control wheel. Every second the chamber stayed alive, thousands more civilians drew closer to escape. Somewhere above, an ancient alien judge watched in absolute silence, knowing the next choice would decide far more than the fate of one dying colony. Welcome to Intergalactic Untold. Now, witness the extraordinary chain of choices that led an alien Valkyrie to kneel before an ordinary human soldier. Ionized dust rolled across the shattered bunker entrance as another orbital impact slammed into the colony. The concrete floor lurched beneath Captain Elias Ward's boots. Ceiling panels burst apart. Emergency lights flickered once, then settled into a dim crimson glow. Around him, Bravo Company moved without panic. Engineers hauled fractured support beams aside. Medics dragged the wounded away from collapsing corridors. Communications specialists abandoned dead consoles and switched to short-range field radios before anyone needed to issue the order. The bunker had rehearsed disaster so many times that instinct moved faster than fear. A tactical display flashed across Elias's visor. Projected survival probability, 18%. He dismissed it with a blink. Status. Lieutenant Noah Keller glanced at the latest structural report before answering. The eastern shelters are gone. Civilian columns from District 4 are still moving toward the transit elevators. Engineering says the access tunnel won't survive another direct strike. Another explosion shook loose a cloud of concrete dust. Somewhere deeper underground, steel screamed under impossible strain. An operations officer hurried across the command room, carrying a stack of handwritten casualty lists. The colony's primary network had become too unstable for reliable updates. Names traveled faster than data now. Elias studied the paper for only a moment. Every line represented someone still waiting for a decision. A younger officer stepped beside him. We can still withdraw the company before the tunnel collapses. No one else spoke. Everyone understood the calculation. Save the soldiers, or hold the corridor long enough for civilians to reach the elevators. The tactical computer refreshed. Projected military survival increased to 61.2% if Bravo Company withdrew immediately. The civilian estimate disappeared. The network no longer possessed enough verified information to calculate it. Elias looked toward the corridor leading to the evacuation route. He pictured children, maintenance crews, hospital workers, and families still running through smoke-filled passageways that his soldiers had not yet abandoned. He closed the tactical projection. We hold. The reply came without hesitation. Yes, sir. No speeches followed. Bravo Company dispersed toward its assigned positions because the decision had already been made. High above the battlefield, aboard the Accord observation vessel, High Valkyrie Sigrun Kaler watched the same engagement through a judicial sensor array. She had witnessed hundreds of campaigns. Patterns repeated. Probability stabilized. Civilizations behaved within measurable limits. Humanity had not. Her analytical interface highlighted Captain Elias Ward. Command recommendation. Strategic withdrawal. Observed action. Defensive commitment. Deviation from optimal survival model. The system marked the choice as statistically irrational. Sigrun did not accept the conclusion. Instead, she opened a dedicated judicial archive under Elias Ward's name. Observation would continue. The war had only begun. Bravo Company reached the eastern transit junction before the next bombardment. The corridor had become a maze of shattered bulkheads, twisted utility lines, and drifting smoke that swallowed every light beyond a few meters. Emergency beacons pulsed through the haze, guiding civilians toward the elevators one fading signal at a time. Elias advanced at the front. His visor struggled to distinguish people from debris as dust and heat distorted every scan. A burst of impacts ripped across the outer wall. Fragments of alloy ricocheted through the passage. One shard struck his left forearm guard with enough force to crack the ceramic plating. The armor held. Barely. Keep moving, Noah shouted. The first civilian column emerged from the smoke. Hospital staff pushed overloaded stretchers. Maintenance workers carried children wrapped inside thermal blankets. Elderly residents leaned on strangers because there was no one else left to lean on. Another barrage thundered overhead. The corridor trembled. A ceiling support snapped. Steel groaned before an entire section collapsed across the evacuation route. Screams echoed through the dust. Without waiting for orders, Bravo Company's engineers rushed forward. Hydraulic cutters bit into twisted beams while infantry formed a defensive line between the trapped civilians and the advancing enemy. Enemy scouts appeared at the far end of the junction. Not enough to launch a full assault. Enough to keep firing. Blue energy bolts slashed through the smoke, striking walls, shattered machinery, and abandoned transport carts. Chips of concrete and metal sprayed across the corridor. Elias knelt beside the fallen support. A child's hand reached through a narrow opening beneath the wreckage. Too small to pull free. He slid onto the broken floor despite the unstable weight overhead. "Jack, stabilize this beam," he said. "If it shifts, the whole section comes down." "I know." Jack wedged a portable brace beneath the fractured support. Its warning indicator flashed yellow, protesting the load. Elias reached farther into the gap. The child's fingers found his glove. Another volley crashed into the junction. The temporary brace shuddered. Dust poured from fresh cracks overhead. Noah fired controlled bursts toward the enemy scouts. The return fire forced them behind cover, buying only a few precious seconds. Elias pulled. The child slid clear just as the brace buckled. Back! Everyone threw themselves away from the collapse. The support crashed onto the floor where Elias had been kneeling moments earlier. Silence lasted only an instant before movement returned. The evacuation line flowed again. An engineering technician hurried over, breathing hard. He pressed a grease-stained construction marker into Elias's hand. "The old maintenance passage," he said. "Follow these markings." The original builders painted them before the colony expanded. Most enemy maps won't show it. Elias looked down. Faded orange symbols stretched along the lower wall, almost hidden beneath soot and chipped concrete. He nodded once. Bravo Company redirected the civilians into the forgotten passage while Noah's platoon remained behind long enough to disguise the turn. Above the battlefield, Sigrun replayed the rescue through the judicial archive. The tactical model estimated that saving one trapped child had delayed the withdrawal by 43 seconds. It also concluded the delay had reduced Bravo Company's survival probability. The calculation was correct. Yet the same decision had preserved the integrity of the evacuation column and kept panic from spreading through the junction. The outcome extended beyond the variables her prediction model had measured. For the first time since arriving in the system, Sigrun suspended an automated assessment and entered a personal observation instead. Some decisions could not be understood by probability alone. The forgotten maintenance passage emerged beneath the colony's primary power gallery. Rows of towering transformers stretched into the distance. High-voltage conduits pulsed overhead, feeding energy to districts already scarred by bombardment. The air smelled of hot insulation and scorched metal. Orange construction markers continued along the service wall. The route still existed exactly where the original engineers had painted it decades earlier. Bravo Company guided the civilian column forward while engineers sealed intersections behind them with controlled demolition charges. Every collapsed corridor shortened the enemy's options. Every explosion also erased another escape route for anyone left behind. An operations technician intercepted Elias beside a maintenance junction. She handed him a portable engineering display linked directly to the reactor grid. "We've lost another distribution hub," she said. "The reactor can't keep every sector online." The display highlighted 2 remaining priorities: outer defense shields, civilian transit systems. Power reserves could sustain only 1. No software offered a better answer. No hidden reserve remained. Elias studied the engineering diagram for a single measured breath. "If the transit system fails?" "The elevators stop," the technician replied. "Anyone below the launch platforms stays there. And the shields? They'll weaken enough for enemy fire to reach the industrial basin." Neither outcome spared the colony. Elias returned the display. "Keep the transit systems alive." The technician hesitated only long enough to understand the order. Then she rerouted the grid. Across the colony, defensive shield intensity began to fall. Moments later, evacuation elevators recovered full operating power. Far above, fresh bombardments punched through sections of the weakened shield network. Explosions rippled across factories, storage depots, and abandoned infrastructure surrounding the basin. The transit lines kept moving. Inside the gallery, the first civilian elevators continued climbing toward the orbital launch complex. A maintenance worker paused beside Elias before boarding. "My father helped build these conduits," she said quietly. "He always said they'd carry power longer than anyone believed." She rested one hand against the warm steel casing as the elevator doors closed. Then she disappeared upward. Bravo Company resumed its advance. The deeper they moved through the gallery, the louder the transformers roared. A violent shockwave swept through the chamber. One suspension frame failed. A massive transformer shifted off its mounting rails. Steel supports twisted as thousands of kilograms of machinery lurched toward the evacuation route. "Move!" Noah shouted. Soldiers pushed civilians behind reinforced maintenance pillars. Engineers triggered emergency anchor bolts buried beneath the gallery floor. The locking mechanisms slammed into place just before the transformer crashed against its restraints. The entire structure shuddered, but it held. The passage remained open. Above the battlefield, Sigrun watched the energy redistribution unfold across the judicial display. Human Command had knowingly exposed military infrastructure to preserve civilian mobility. The tactical models predicted greater long-term operational losses. The engineering data confirmed the decision had prevented the evacuation network from failing. Again, probability described the cost. It did not explain the choice. Sigrun added the complete power transfer sequence to Elias Ward's judicial archive without removing a single engineering detail. The evidence would matter later, even if no one yet understood why. The maintenance passage opened into the colony's freight district. Towering cargo cranes stood frozen between shattered warehouses. Suspended containers swayed overhead whenever distant bombardments shook the steel framework. Conveyor lines had stopped hours earlier, leaving abandoned shipments scattered across loading platforms and rail spurs. The fated construction markers ended here. Beyond this point, Bravo Company would have to navigate through terrain that no longer resembled its original design. Noah climbed onto the remains of a loading ramp and studied the maze ahead. "The central avenue is exposed," he said. "Too many firing angles." Elias followed his gaze. Collapsed warehouses had created narrow corridors between stacks of freight containers. Maintenance catwalks connected several crane towers above the district, but many had partially collapsed under repeated strikes. "We stay low," Elias said. "Use the cargo lanes. Move only when the cranes block their line of sight." No tactical prediction was needed. The battlefield itself revealed the safest path. Bravo Company advanced in short bursts. Each movement matched the slow swing of damaged crane arms drifting on weakened bearings. Massive containers became moving walls, shielding civilians for a few precious seconds before exposing them again. Enemy reconnaissance units entered the district sooner than expected. They spread through the open loading yards with disciplined precision, forcing the defenders to change direction before the freight lanes became a trap. A burst of enemy fire shattered the supports beneath an elevated catwalk. Steel rained into the cargo lanes. One maintenance crew became trapped beneath twisted beams only meters from the advancing civilians. Without hesitation, 2 infantry squads broke formation and rushed toward the collapse. Noah looked at Elias. "If we stop now, they close the distance." "If we don't," Elias answered, "those workers never leave this district." No further discussion followed. Covering fire echoed through the freight yard as engineers cut away fractured steel. Civilians already beyond the collapse turned back to help lift debris instead of continuing toward safety. No one ordered them to return. They simply refused to leave others behind. The delay cost Bravo Company another defensive position. Enemy units secured the abandoned loading platforms overlooking the district. From there, they gained clear observation over much of the freight network. The tactical situation worsened. The evacuation continued. High above the colony, Grand Strategist Theros Vane reviewed the same engagement from the Accord Command Chamber. "Human Command continues sacrificing battlefield initiative," he observed. Sigrun did not answer immediately. She replayed the sequence from multiple sensor angles. The rescued maintenance workers joined the evacuation column less than 3 minutes later. Several immediately assisted engineers clearing another blocked passage farther ahead. Resources preserved early continued strengthening the evacuation later. The value exceeded their original number. Theros studied the updated projections. They continue choosing inefficient outcomes. They continue producing outcomes your projections did not predict, Sigrun replied. Neither officer argued further. The archive required observation, not conclusions. Below them, Bravo Company disappeared deeper into the freight district as another wave of bombardment rolled across the industrial skyline. The freight district narrowed into the colony's logistics hub. Towering stacks of shipping containers formed shifting corridors beneath damaged loading cranes. Automated cargo vehicles sat abandoned where emergency shutdowns had frozen them in place. Every path offered cover. Every turn concealed another uncertainty. Engineers hurried toward Elias with an updated tactical report. The enemy is adapting, one of them said. They're intercepting our movement predictions almost as fast as we generate them. The battlefield computer displayed a web of projected routes. Each recommendation assumed the defenders would always choose the option with the highest probability of military survival. Elias studied the display for only a moment. Then he closed it. Forget the prediction model. Several officers looked up. Noah understood first. If we stop following the obvious route, they'll keep preparing for it, Elias finished. The evacuation column turned away from the expected corridor. Instead of moving through the central logistics lanes, Bravo Company led everyone into Warehouse 12, a structure already marked as strategically worthless in every battlefield projection. Dust drifted through broken skylights. Rows of empty storage racks stretched into darkness. Old fluorescent evacuation markings still clung to the concrete floor, almost invisible beneath years of grime. Maintenance workers recognized them immediately. They lead to the original freight tunnel. The tunnel had never appeared on the current tactical network. It had been abandoned decades earlier, then sealed from every modern logistics map. Engineers forced open the rusted service doors. Cold air rolled out from the forgotten passage. The civilian column disappeared inside, while Bravo Company collapsed shelving behind them, masking the entrance beneath tons of twisted steel. Minutes later, enemy assault units swept through the logistics hub. They secured the central cargo lanes exactly where every probability model had predicted the defenders would be. Warehouse 12 received only a brief inspection before being dismissed as an empty storage facility with no strategic value. The hidden evacuation route remained undiscovered. Noah watched the enemy advance from a narrow observation slit inside the warehouse wall. A young soldier beside him stared toward the occupied cargo lanes. "They're waiting for us. They're waiting for the version of us they expected," Noah replied. No one celebrated. The enemy had not become weaker. They had only been searching in the wrong place. When the last civilians cleared the freight tunnel, Bravo Company sealed the entrance from the inside and withdrew through a maintenance shaft that rejoined the evacuation route farther ahead. Above the battlefield, Sigrun replayed the engagement through every available sensor feed. The tactical prediction system had failed for the first time since the campaign began. Not because its calculations were inaccurate, because human command had deliberately abandoned the pattern the system expected. Probability remained mathematically correct. Reality had moved somewhere else. Sigrun archived the complete sequence without annotation. Across the command chamber, the Ros reviewed the same recordings in silence. The statistical models would have to change. The humans already had. The freight tunnel climbed into the colony's outer habitation ring. The air changed first. Warm industrial heat faded behind them, replaced by a sharp chill that slipped through damaged seals and cracked bulkheads. Frost spread across abandoned apartment doors. Thin ribbons of vapor drifted through narrow corridors where pressure slowly leaked into space. Families had fled in haste. Children's toys floated near fractured ceilings. Meals sat untouched on overturned tables. Emergency lights reflected across frozen windows, casting long crimson streaks through silent hallways. Bravo Company moved carefully, every rifle shot wrist rupturing another weakened compartment. Every explosion threatened the passage behind them as much as the enemy ahead. An engineer met Elias outside a sealed pressure gate. "The next sector won't hold much longer," she said. "If this gate stays open, decompression reaches the evacuation corridor. And if we close it?" She looked past him toward the civilians still crossing. "Anyone on the far side stays there." Elias studied the stream of people moving through the narrowing passage. Hospital workers pushed the last stretchers across damaged flooring. Maintenance crews carried oxygen tanks by hand after automated transport systems failed. Volunteers helped strangers they had never met before. No one was moving fast anymore, only steadily. Noah checked the rear security line. Enemy units are almost here. The engineer looked back at Elias. We're out of time. He gave a single order. Keep the gate open until the last civilian crosses. No one questioned it. Bravo Company spread out across the corridor, using overturned maintenance carts, fractured support columns, and damaged pressure locks as improvised cover. Enemy fire reached the habitation ring moments later. Controlled bursts echoed through the frozen passage. Fragments tore into walls already weakened by decompression. Engineers hurried the final civilians toward the gate while soldiers yielded ground a few meters at a time. The last evacuation stretcher crossed the threshold. Noah looked back once. Everyone's through. Elias hit the manual release. Massive steel doors rolled together with a deep mechanical groan. A handful of human defenders remained on the opposite side, still holding back the advancing force. They understood the order before the gap disappeared. None of them tried to run. The pressure seal locked. An instant later, decompression surged through the abandoned sector. Loose debris, shattered furniture, and drifting ice crystals vanished into the darkness beyond fractured hull plates. The advancing enemy lost the corridor. So did the soldiers who had remained behind. Silence settled over the sealed passage. No one spoke. Bravo Company resumed escorting the civilians toward the reactor district because there was nothing left to change. High above the colony, emergency notifications reached the Accord observation vessel. Several council representatives transmitted formal requests for an immediate judicial recommendation. Human losses had reached catastrophic levels. Military resistance was collapsing. They argued that further observation served no practical purpose. Sigrun reviewed the complete archive before answering. She rejected every request. The record is incomplete. The replies arrived almost immediately. The outcome is already clear. Sigrun closed the transmission window without responding. Below her, one final route still remained open. Until every consequence could be observed, judgment would wait. The sealed pressure gate faded behind Bravo Company as they entered the reactor approach. The corridors grew quieter with every step. No artillery reached this deep beneath the colony. No distant gunfire echoed through the steel. Only the steady vibration of the reactor traveled through the walls, slow and unbroken, like the heartbeat of a structure carrying far more weight than it had ever been designed to bear. Names replaced battlefield reports. The colony's damaged network could no longer track everyone who had fallen. Engineers passed handwritten casualty lists from one checkpoint to the next. Fresh names appeared in hurried strokes. Others ended with blank spaces where confirmation had never arrived. Elias accepted one folded page. He recognized soldiers from Bravo Company. He recognized maintenance workers who had guided civilians through forgotten service tunnels. He recognized none of the strangers whose names filled the remaining lines. He folded the paper without another word. Nearby, Noah adjusted the fractured plating on his shoulder with improvised fasteners scavenged from abandoned maintenance equipment. We're almost there, he said. Elias looked ahead. We're exactly where we knew we'd end up. Beyond the next security door, engineers waited beside construction drawings spread across a portable work table. The paper had survived because the digital archive had not. An elderly reactor engineer rested one hand on the diagrams. We've exhausted every automatic safeguard, she said. The governors can't keep the support lattice stable anymore. She pointed toward the reactor chamber. Manual regulation is the only option left. Another engineer unfolded a second drawing. It showed the reactor's emergency power architecture. The chamber has one independent life support reserve, he explained. If we transfer that reserve into the colony's structural framework, the stabilization sequence can finish. And after the transfer? Elias asked. The engineer answered without hesitation. The chamber loses its protected environment. Radiation shielding, auxiliary cooling, emergency air circulation, all of it. He tapped the final line printed across the schematic. The transfer can't be reversed once the sequence begins. Silence settled over the room. No one searched for another solution. The engineering team had already tested every alternative the remaining equipment allowed. A low tremor passed through the floor. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Somewhere above them, another section of the industrial basin absorbed a direct impact. The reactor engineer placed a weathered notebook beside the construction drawings. "My mentor wrote this while the colony was still being built," she said. "Every emergency revision, every reinforcement, every compromise." The final page remained unfinished. There had never been time to complete it. Elias slid the notebook beneath the same retaining strap that held the construction plans. The colony's history and its future now rested together in a single folder. High above the battlefield, Sigrun received confirmation that the emergency judicial transmission corridor remained operational. If the archive reached the accord before communications failed completely, wartime review could begin immediately after the engagement ended. She attached the notification to the growing judicial record without altering a single observation. Nearby, the Rose watched fresh casualty projections spread across the command display. Their resistance has become strategically irreversible. Sigrun kept her attention on the engineering archive streaming from the colony below. So have their choices. Deep beneath the surface, Elias picked up the folder containing the construction drawings and the unfinished notebook. Then he walked toward the reactor chamber, where every remaining path narrowed into a single decision whose cost already had a name. The reactor access conduit narrowed until Elias had to turn sideways between coolant pipes that still pulsed with fading heat. The deeper he descended, the quieter the colony became. The battle disappeared. Only the steady resonance of the reactor remained, vibrating through the steel beneath every step. At the upper control station, Maya verified the evacuation corridor one final time. She locked the blast hatch behind him with a mechanical release that required no external power. The heavy bolts slammed into place. The chamber below would remain sealed until the regulation sequence was complete. The primary regulation room shimmered behind layers of thermal haze. Darkened control cabinets lined one wall, their automatic systems already burned out by repeated overloads. Several actuator housings had warped under relentless strain. At the center of the platform stood a single manual regulation wheel, exactly where the construction drawings had shown it would be. There was no emergency override, no hidden safeguard. The engineering diagrams rested beneath a magnetic clip beside the console. Elias read each step once. Coolant redistribution, resonance alignment, manual synchronization. The final instruction occupied a single line. Transfer independent life support reserved to the colony framework. Manual regulation required until lock. He lifted the transparent safety cover. His visor displayed the engineering consequences. The reactor still held enough energy to preserve the colony's structural framework or maintain the chamber's independent survival system. It could not sustain both. If the transfer began, the chamber would lose auxiliary cooling, emergency air circulation, independent lighting, and dedicated radiation shielding. That energy would be redirected into the supports holding the industrial basin together. The sequence could never be reversed after synchronization. Elias pressed the switch. The chamber changed immediately. Emergency lights dimmed until only the reactor core illuminated the room. Cooling fans slowed to silence. The last radiation barriers shut down. Warning symbols spread across his visor. Elsewhere in the colony, load indicators stabilized as power reached the support lattice. At the same moment, long-range sensor arrays went dark. Deep space communications vanished. Maintenance elevators froze between levels. Every remaining what found a new destination. Outside the reactor complex, the bombardment continued without pause. Precision strikes shifted toward the weakened industrial basin as enemy reconnaissance identified the surviving evacuation routes. Noah's platoon abandoned another defensive platform after its supporting truss buckled beneath sustained fire. Engineers detonated bridge anchors only after the final civilians crossed. The attackers never lost momentum. They simply encountered structures that refused to fail when expected. Each passing minute carried another irreversible cost. High above the battlefield, Sigrun watched engineering telemetry replace tactical projections across her display. Reactor output remained constant. Only distribution had changed. The chamber's independent life support had disappeared. No reserve activated. No hidden system came online. Her analytical interface projected the statistically optimal command response. Terminate manual regulation. Preserve the commander. The recommendation remained on the screen for only a moment. One verified human signature continued regulating the reactor, while radiation exposure climbed beyond every survivable limit. Judicial authority offered no right to interfere. Sigrun continued recording. The regulation will resisted from the first movement. Years of thermal expansion had tightened the mechanism far beyond its intended tolerance. Elias leaned against it until metal shrieked and finally gave way. Pressure readings shifted. One coolant circuit reopened. The support lattice strengthened. He forced the wheel farther. A ruptured coolant manifold burst overhead. Superheated vapor swept across the platform. The blast hurled him against the console. Ceramic armor fractured across his left shoulder. The pressure seal beneath it failed. His visor flickered. Radiation distortion flooded the display before clearing just enough to reveal the next alignment mark. He reached for the wheel again. Each adjustment redirected more energy into the colony's failing framework. District lighting faded. Environmental systems entered deeper conservation mode. Nothing created additional power. The reactor merely spent what remained differently. The final calibration mark aligned. Elias drove the locking lever downward. Heavy mechanical latches engaged with a deep metallic impact. Synchronization complete. Permanent transfer confirmed. The chamber's independent life support reserve was gone forever. Above the reactor, the industrial basin stopped sinking. Support columns still groaned beneath impossible loads, but they held. The western evacuation route remained intact. One transport lifted clear of the launch tower. Another followed before the first disappeared into the clouds. Noah watched both vessels climb while directing the last of his ammunition toward enemy infantry advancing through the shattered freight district. Nothing interrupted the assault. Nothing weakened the attackers. The colony endured only because its final reserve had been spent where no automatic system had ever been designed to spend it. Inside the regulation chamber, every breath now depended on the reactor's primary circulation. Radiation alarms merged into a single continuous tone before Elias silenced them. His injured left arm responded slowly as blood seeped beneath the shattered armor. The console displayed no further warnings. Only confirmation. The colony framework remained stable. Elias rested one hand against the regulation housing, ensuring the locking mechanism could not shift. Beyond the reinforced walls, the last evacuation convoy raced across a colony that still stood because its final reserve had been exchanged for time. The final evacuation transport broke through the cloud layer as fragments of the launch tower rained back across the dying colony. Its engine trail faded into orbit. Only after the departure beacon disappeared did Noah signal the remaining defenders to disengage. There was no orderly retreat left to execute. Small groups crossed shattered service bridges carrying whoever could still be carried. Engineers abandoned cutting tools where the supports no longer needed reinforcement. Medics left empty oxygen cylinders beside pressure doors that would never open again. When the last team reached the western side of the basin, demolition charges severed the bridge behind them. The span folded into darkness. The pursuing force reached the broken edge minutes later. No further advance could recover the civilians already beyond the atmosphere. Engineering stabilization crews entered the reactor sector first. Radiation levels remained too high for medical teams. Portable shielding frames advanced through the access conduit one section at a time, while technicians confirmed that the regulation mechanism had locked permanently under thermal load. Only after exposure levels dropped to emergency limits did the rescue team cut through the sealed hatch. Heat spilled into the corridor before the doorway finished opening. Elias was still standing. One hand rested against the regulation housing exactly where the locking sequence had ended. His damaged armor came away in fractured sections. Radiation dosimeters climbed with every layer removed. The attending physician looked at the readings once, then focused entirely on treatment. Permanent nerve damage had spread through Elias's left arm. The exposure had scarred tissue no surgery could restore. The colony remained standing. His body never would be the same. From orbit, Sigrun assembled the completed judicial archive. Nothing had been isolated for dramatic effect. Every verified event remained in sequence. The rescue beneath direct fire. The transfer of reactor power. The collapse of predictive command. The sealed isolation gates. The handwritten engineering records. The manual stabilization. No single decision explained the outcome. Together, They revealed an unbroken chain in which every gain demanded something measurable in return. The final transmission cleared the system before the colony's remaining communications failed. That confirmation activated the Accord's wartime judicial procedure. An emergency review convened while refugee transports were still leaving the system. Grand Strategist Theros Vane submitted the operational assessment. Human forces had displayed extraordinary adaptability. They had also accepted losses that permanently reduced their own military strength. Neither finding weakened the other. Sigrun presented the judicial file without commentary. Telemetry, engineering data, medical findings, command logs, evacuation records, authenticated battlefield observations. The chamber reviewed every document in procedural silence. When deliberation ended, the proposal for immediate extermination failed to secure the authority required under Accord law. Humanity would face recognition proceedings instead. The ruling erased nothing. It guaranteed nothing. It acknowledged only what the evidence had established. Theros closed the file after reading the decision in full. His objection remained part of the official record. So did the findings that outweighed it. Neither would be removed. Weeks later, a Commonwealth medical carrier drifted among repair docks crowded with refugee vessels. Rehabilitation had restored enough strength for Elias to walk the observation deck. His left hand still refused precise movement. Even simple tasks demanded patience that combat had never allowed. Beyond the viewing port, civilian transports departed one after another toward new settlements deeper inside Commonwealth space. Life continued. Changed forever. But continued. The hatch behind him opened. Sigrun entered alone. Her ceremonial armor still bore the insignia of the Judicial Corps, though the mission that had brought her to the colony had already become the subject of political debate throughout the Accord. Several human officers remained outside the compartment. They watched. They did not interrupt. Sigrun removed the judgment staff from her belt and balanced it across both palms. Then she lowered herself onto one knee before Captain Elias Ward. The gesture belonged to no military regulation. It belonged to the office she represented and to the truth she had sworn to preserve. She offered neither praise nor apology. Elias regarded the staff in silence. His injured left hand could no longer close firmly enough to lift it. Instead, he accepted it with his right hand, returned it with the same deliberate care, and stepped back. Sigrun rose. Respect had been given. Nothing more needed to be said. Outside the carrier, another convoy slipped away from the docks. Its engines brightened against the darkness before fading among the stars. The colony would never be rebuilt. Those who escaped would carry its cost wherever they found a new home. Thank you for staying through this journey. If you had stood where Elias stood, would you have traded your own future to save thousands of strangers? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Galactic Contact for more unforgettable stories.